With over 656,000 square miles of rugged wilderness, scenic beauty, and abundant wildlife, Alaska is a huge place, twice the size of Texas, and larger than all but 18 countries in the sovereign world. How do you get from there? A lot of people know that you can take airline travel, you can take the sea, you can take railroad, but what about driving? Do you know that you can drive from the lower 48 all the way up into Alaska? The answer is yes. Myself personally did it last month, March 2010, driving from Anchorage, Alaska all the way down to Northern California through Canada. It's called the Alaska Highway. And today I'm here to inform you about the Alaska Highway. I'm going to inform you what it is, I'm going to inform you the history of the Alaska Highway, and inform you about my very own personal experience driving through those parts. Starting off with what it is, and according to the milepost.com, the Alaska Highway is a 1,523 mile paved road which starts at Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and goes all the way up through the Yukon Territory on into Alaska and ends at Delta Junction City, Alaska. It's just full of beautiful wildlife, and it's a very long road and bumpy at times. Depending on what time of the year, you can drive through snow or whatever. So basically, in a nutshell, that's what the Alaska Highway is. As for the history, I'll give you a little history lesson on it. Back in 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, the United States military needed supplies up to Alaska, and they needed to get it quick. So they had no other option but to build a highway through Canada up on into Alaska. So in February of 1942, President Roosevelt signed to acknowledge that it would be okay to build a highway up to Alaska. The construction didn't start until March of that same year, 1942, with over, I believe, 12,000 Army engineers that completed this job by November of that same year, 1942. Is a great accomplishment. They got their supplies to the military, and in return, we basically won the war with the help of that. I'm not saying that we won the war because of the Alaska Highway system, but it sure helped. And further into history, about in 1946, the U.S. handed the Alaska Highway portion that was in Canada back over to the Canadian government, which in return the Canadian government reimbursed all the expenses for the construction of the part that we built in Canada for the Alaska Highway. So great accomplishment there. And farther into history, just a couple more years later, without the Alaska Highway, I would say Alaska would not be a state for a very long time. Statehood began in 1949, and it was very, very a huge deal because of all the resources there. So there's your history lesson real quick, and then as we go into it, I want to talk about my experience of driving the Alaska Highway. It took about 5 days to get from Anchorage, Alaska to California. First day I drove about 5 hours to Tok, Alaska. It's right next, almost to the border, the Canadian border and US border. Tok, Alaska is pretty good. Stayed there. Second day I drove into, stayed at Watson Lake. And the next day I stayed into Prince George, which is in British Columbia. It was my first day in British Columbia. And then the next day I drove down to Seattle, back into the United States, and then on to California the next day. But like I said, it was a beautiful drive, and I would do it again any day. It was a great drive. Some people don't like driving, but for me, in a sense, it was rewarding and a great accomplishment because there's not a lot of people that can drive 3,000 miles all the way to California. So basically that's what I am here today for you, just informing you basically the history of the Alaska Highway, what it is, and my very own personal experience which I shared with you. So that's all I got today, so thank you.